This is the Physical Activity Researcher Podcast, a podcast for researchers of sedentary behavior, physical activity, and sports. Join for a relaxed dialogue about research design, practicalities, and, well, anything related to research. Learn from your fellow researchers useful and relevant information that does not fit into formal content and limited space of scientific publications. And here is your host, researcher and entrepreneur, Olli Tikkanen.
Welcome for Physical Activity Researcher Podcast, and today's episode we have a guest all the way from Newark, Delaware, Dr Saponaro, and he's doing a PhD in Delaware, University of Delaware. Welcome, Matthew.
Thanks, Olli.
Yeah, and so your PhD is about artificial intelligence, which sounds really interesting. Could you tell us more about your work?
Right. So I'm a computer science person that has been twisted very heavily into the behavior, health, and nutrition. So essentially what I'm trying to do is I'm wanting to provide adaptive real-time coaching to individuals. So I'd like to, for example, have a FitBit and have the Fitbit provide very tailored feedback specific to that person. And so I'm developing the machine learning algorithms that's can able to learn that type of behavior and type of coaching strategy on the individual level. And so one of the ideas is that when we apply this machine learning algorithm, we need some training. We need to train the AI. And that requires data. And in the human learning world, so for example, if I was to learn your behavior, the training data is very expensive. And so for example, I want to nudge a person to get up and do physical activity. So on a Fitbit, that would be a vibration and a message saying, hey, get up and, make your 250 steps by the end of the hour. And then I will observe whether you actually get up or not and increase your step count after the result of that nudge. Now, I only have a certain amount of times in a day that I can be able to do that. Suppose that there's 16 waking hours in each day. So that means that there's 16 data points that I can collect each day on you specifically. The other thing is that if I'm sending at the hour level, right? The other thing is that I don't necessarily want to annoy my user too much by sending like bad intervention times. If I send a message every single hour, right, that may be annoying to its user. So if I keep learning too much, then that's negatively seen by the user, and I run the risk of being thrown into a drawer if I'm the smartwatch. So my AI, what it essentially does is it tries to reuse information from other people in order to train the machine learning algorithm, but it needs to try to maintain relevancy to the individual while also providing individualized feedback.
All right, that sounds really interesting. So basically, you give real time. You gave one example about collecting steps. What other kind of things you could give us as an interesting examples?
So with all the Internet of Health things that are coming around, there's so many different sensors that we have just readily available that we're actively collecting. You can collect things like your location from your phone, your calendar from your phone, right? You can, if you have a wearable device, you can include things like accelerometer data. You can include your heart rate data. You can include steps. You can include what type of activity is being done based on those previous data points. You can estimate intensity levels or caloric expenditure. If you have any type of because we're getting all this fancy technology now. Like I've seen Nokia particularly, they have these scales that you can just step on every single morning and it'll send your weight measurements to your phone, or you can take your blood pressure monitor. So you can include all these different things. And finally, you can get things like online about today's date. So for example, you can get the weather. You can get whether there was any interesting things that happened in the stock market. Maybe the stock market affects your mood if you're investing in stocks, right?
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. Like, so basically you could actually see the calendar. There's for example a meeting coming, and it's marked as a 2-hour meeting. So you could actually check that the weather is good, so there's sunny outside, and you could nudge the person to go for a 10-minute walk before the long meeting, which is actually important to be in a good mental state.
Right. A lot of these things, particularly with meetings, some of them are very recurrent events. So they happen again and again, and they're very predictable. Some of the types of things that we're looking at is very like one-time things. So one of the analysis that we're doing is trying to, so we actually imported our calendar data, and we were trying to analyze whether things were recurrent or not. And we had our participants label whether they're recurrent. And we're using that in our machine learning algorithm.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And how was your day? How similar the days were in your calendar, for example?
So I'm a very bad person to ask these types of research questions, because for me particularly, I don't wear a Fitbit and I don't include stuff in my phone. But for the things that I've seen from other people's data that I've collected, actually there's a really strong predictability among people. So what I found, so we did a previous study, and in order for us to prepare for this machine learning algorithm, we analyzed two things. We analyzed whether a person's schedule was predictable and whether the person shared similarities across other individuals. And it was very, very interesting, because when we looked at similarity across the individuals, we didn't have any types of, we weren't looking for anything particularly. But what we found out was that when we looked at the students that we measured, when we looked at the faculty, when we looked at the full-time employees, we saw clusters of behavior profiles. And so that really helped to show that many people share similar habits at a very high level perspective. And also we were getting pretty strong predictability ratings as well. Particularly, I was not thinking from like our students or faculty, but they were pretty predictable, particularly the faculty that we had in our study.
No, that's really interesting. I'm thinking, like, for example, that if you go to some exercise training, and basically the AI or your calendar knows what times you have chances to go, and then you can have business trips there. You can have longer meetings that go over it. So it could actually kind of guide you that, all right, did you notice that on Thursdays and Fridays you cannot attend that one which you normally go to? So maybe take the Tuesday and Monday ones. Yeah. And are you looking more to increase the everyday activity of the person, or kind of more like exercise behavior?
Right now, I may have misled. So right now, I'm trying to just reduce the sedentary behavior. So there's two sides of the world. There's reducing the sedentary behavior and increasing the physical activity levels. And I'm just trying to reduce sedentary behavior at this point. So I'm just trying to get people to not sit as much as they do.
Now that's a really, really good one, and I think it probably works very well. So on practical level, what is you have developed an algorithm, do I understand correct? Yeah. So what does it do at the moment? How far are you with this thing?
Right. So the algorithms been published over at the advanced. I don't know what the conference name is. It's called Triple AI. It's the AI conference.
I do know it. Yeah. Yeah.
That's terrible. I think it's like the advancement of autonomous and artificial intelligence.
Something like that. Yeah. Yeah. Maybe you need to make a machine learning to simplify the abbreviation of that one and find a good option. Yeah.
So the algorithm has been published in a conference. The preliminary algorithm, and essentially the idea is that we have a bunch of default policies, default coaching strategies, and actually what we do is we try for each person, we try each one of these. And over time, the more positive feedback that we get from the person, meaning the more physical, least amount of sedentary behavior, then we prefer that coaching strategy more, and we probabilistically choose each one of those. That's called policy reuse. And my algorithm actually takes it a step further. So in the previously it talks about, a person's coaching strategy. What I do is I segment the coaching strategy into different parts. And so I identify the different parts that may be relevant amongst the population. And I reuse parts of those policies. And it's called partial policy reuse.
All right. So basically, the positive feedback is that if the sedentary behavior actually decreased, and you're kind of upvoting those strategies, is that correct? All right. And so what kind of sorry.
In the meantime of it updating those strategies, it's also adapting the strategy. So it also has its own strategy. The personalized strategy is very, it's run offline at the very beginning. And as more data is collected, it starts using that personal strategy more and more. And the idea is that as you collect more data, the personalized strategy will become better. And so the idea is that while we're executing these other strategies, we're actually training our own personal strategy and individualizing it for that particular person.
All right. Sounds really interesting. Okay, let's get back to that in a moment and hear a few words from our sponsors.
This podcast is sponsored by Fibion. Fibion is an accurate sitting and physical activity tracking device and analysis platform. It is a great tool for projects that aim for behavior change in sedentary behavior and incidental physical activity. Fibion provides easy-to-understand PDF and web browser reports for participants. Other features include comparisons to recommendations, linking results to health risks, achievement cards, and interactive goal-setting tool. In addition, Fibion provides an API that allows for easy integration to other systems and applications. Learn more about Fibion at fibion.com/research. Fibion, from researchers to researchers.
And I wanted to ask about the actions, so there's some actions or strategies that possibly decrease the sedentary behavior of an individual. So what kind of things you have, what kind of things it's encouraging person to do?
From a computational perspective, this problem is very, very challenging because there's lots of different variables and it just it explodes because there's just way too much going on. So one of the simplifications I've made for that particular publication is the when. So we have a when to send a nudge. We also have the what to send a nudge. And we also have the where and all that good stuff, right? Where is more incorporated into the when in my algorithm. And for now, I'm just looking at what times would people be receptive to receive a message. So the messages that I'm particularly sending is, there's two sets of messages. There's the positive feedback messages and then the negative feedback messages. So the positive feedback messages is like, hey, get up and take a short walk. It'll improve your cardiovascular health. Right? The negative feedback messages are like, hey, if you don't walk more, then you are going to be X amount likely for a heart attack later. So you get because I've read some papers that are like, there's messages that people respond differently to different types of messages. So I was looking at, okay, if I just have these two sets of messages, the positive messages and the negative messages, what types of people would prefer different of these messages?
All right, I see. Although both of them are kind of pushing to do, the other one could be that when they have actually taken some steps, it would say that, whoa, that was actually good to you. Do you know that this did this and that for your body? Yeah, no, that's very interesting. Yeah, so do you see a pattern that does the positive work better or the negative, or how is the division between individuals? Yeah, no, that's very, very interesting. And so now you kind of either threatening with the disease or encouraging with the improved health, basically cardiovascular fitness. Yeah, I think for many people it's rather difficult to, if you say them that if you do not do this, you might get the diabetes in 20 years. But people, they are busy in their daily life. What happens in 20 years, it doesn't make a big difference now. And especially if it's just that you might get. I think that's the problem why many people don't do physical activity, or they are too sedentary, because you need to do the things today that's important this week, and something in 20 years is maybe not their priority. Yeah, so maybe you can also try different kind of messaging that could, I don't know how it could relate more to something more close in the future. That maybe if you encourage to do something and say that you will feel right away more energetic or something, if that would be more work better.
Right. So I was working with some of my coworkers, and we've been primarily stuck in the office, and we've been sitting down all day for like 8 hours. I'm a sedentary behavior researcher, and I'm sitting down for 8 hours. What?
You need to experience it to be able to help.
And one of the conversations that we were going, because I talk a lot about the health impacts of sitting down and how we shouldn't be doing it. And one of the things that my coworker said to me was that if he gets up and walks around a little bit, he has a little bit more energy than if he were to sit down all day. So if he sits down all day and then he gets up, he feels very tired to stand. So I think maybe there's something along that lines in order to improve the short term. People want to have more energy. They want to be more happier, things like that. We can try to say, hey, your mood will be much better if you just take a small standing break.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Yeah. So did your colleague say actually that if he's standing, he gets tired, but if he walks, he gets more energetic?
So if he sits all day and then stands, he's very tired to stand up. But if he takes these small breaks and then stands, he doesn't feel as tired.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah. Yeah, no, and what is do you try to commercialize this solution, or where do you aim?
So right now I'm in the process of starting a startup. And
All right.
the startup name is called AI Woo. And the idea is to take this dissertation product and start commercializing it. And so some of the ways that what I'm trying to do right now is to start tailoring to the general population. So in the research world, we make all these different assumptions, and we assume that we have all this data, and then we pay people for that data, right? So over in the United States. So the idea is that we have the application that I have right now. It's a battery drainer because it records the GPS location, and it doesn't use the built-in, the GPS that the Apple provides. And it requires the user to constantly check in and not. So a lot of these things have a very bad user experience. So the next things is for me to start, improving the application in order to release it to the population. And I'm working on trying to integrate this with some of the health programs that I've been coming across.
And with can you actually do it now by yourself without collaborating with the Fitbit to do it, that it actually works with the Fitbit, or how is the stage?
So right now, Fitbit provides Fitbit provides access to the developers on a daily level or an intraday level, and we can get access on the intraday level. You just need to fill out a form, and they'll say, okay, we'll give you access to that data. Then you just connect via the Fitbit device will connect to your phone via Bluetooth. And when it connects to your phone, it sends a message to their servers. And from my perspective, I just pull the data from the Fitbit servers. And so that's actually what I'm doing right now.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I think there's probably a lot of researchers who would like to test that in their interventions. There's a lot of Fitbits out there, and if they can just by installing an application get that kind of nudging, I'm pretty sure there will be a lot of interest for this.
So part of my my business, I'm working on this data collection, data analytics platform, and one of the interesting things is that it's trying to abstract out the device, like where the data is coming from. And so I'm trying to now integrate from Fitbit to Apple Watch to the Garmin devices to any type of data that I can put into a particular format and include in my system. And so I'm actually trying to through my smart coach system, I have the business side of things that are trying to, push it into the health programs. The other side of things is going to be a commercialized app. And the idea is that I'm providing a smart coach service to the users, and I would like to start collaborating with researchers and provide researchers the data that I'm working with. And maybe the researchers can also, help improve the smart coaching system, or include some of their research to communicate with the individuals to help see how they respond as well.
Yeah. And could you share your email already in the stage of the podcast? So if somebody interested doing collaboration, how to reach you?
Sure. It's Matt Sapp at aiwoo.com. So MATTSAP at AIWHOO.com.
All right, great. So if you're interested, please be in contact with Matt. Yeah. So we were talking. So there's an application, and how do you see to to move on with your startup idea? You're finishing your PhD soon, and
I've been going back and forth with my advisor for a while now, and I sent him an email. I got an email saying, "Hey, you should enroll into fall semester classes." And I forwarded that email to my advisor and say, "Hey, do I need to do this?" And he said, "I don't think so. You should be graduated by then." So I should be graduating by end of summer.
All right.
Right. And right now I'm actually being funded through the National Science Foundation, NSF, in order to start taking this dissertation to do my customer discovery interviews. And more particularly try to figure out what the product is. And I've done lots of interviews already. I've done 20 plus interviews. And now the next steps is there's another grant from NSF that I'm going to be applying that's going to continue to fund the startup.
All right, that's nice. And I don't know if many of the listeners know NSF and how it works. So can you give a short idea how to apply for funding and how to secure it?
Right. So nsf.gov is the National Science Foundation's the website, and essentially they'll have all these different lists of things that you can apply to. I would search through the search bar at the top. If you're a startup company, you'd probably want to search for the Small Business Innovation Research proposal. But for the researchers, whatever is in your field, they have very specific proposals in each of the different fields. You have to write a proposal with your introductions, your motivations. Why are you qualified for what you're saying you're doing, what you actually are going to do? You have to provide a schedule. It's pretty in depth. They can go from anywhere between this one I've written is a very, very, the first steps in the I-Corp site. It's a very, very small proposal. It's like a 3-page proposal. The other grants proposals, they range from 40 pages, and they can go up into the multi-million-dollar ranges, or they can be as small as just a few $1,000s.
All right, so you climbing up the ladder to the
all on the smaller side, and I'll work my way up.
All right, that sounds good. Yeah, and how competitive are these grants like in NSF?
So NSF, NIH. So NIH is the National Institute of Health, and they follow the same types of patterns as the NSF, and it's pretty competitive. I'm not sure what the acceptance rates are, but I would assume it's lower than 20%. I would assume.
All right. Yeah. All right, that's interesting. And you're finishing your PhD quite soon. What kind of publications will you include in your work?
So I've already written the last step for me to graduate, and I've already written everything except for a small portion in my results section, and I'm going to be trying to publish in the Journal of Medical Innovations Research, JMIR. And essentially what it's going to be including is the one of the studies for the tailored individualized coaching strategy. So I'm going to analyze things about how adaptive is the coach to the individual. What's the differences between the behavior at the very beginning of the study with the behaviors at the very end of the study in order to measure, okay, did the person actually improve in sedentary behavior? I'm also going to be looking at things like, are there specific populations that this coach is more effective on or not effective on? And it's essentially going to be applying this smart coach algorithm to a real population.
All right. Yeah, that's interesting. And are you testing it in free living conditions, or how do you do the testing?
Right. All this work is in free living conditions. So I am strapping up I think 60 people with Fitbits and installing the mobile application on their phone and letting them go. And they'll be getting messages throughout the week, throughout the day, and they have to evaluate the messages, say, hey, was this a good message that helped you to improve your sedentary behavior?
Let's have a short break and hear a few words from our sponsor.
This podcast is sponsored by Fibion. Fibion is an accurate sitting and physical activity tracking device and analysis platform. It is a great tool for projects that aim for behavior change in sedentary behavior and incidental physical activity. Fibion provides easy-to-understand PDF and web browser reports for participants. Other features include comparisons to recommendations, linking results to health risks, achievement cards, and interactive goal-setting tool. In addition, Fibion provides an API that allows for easy integration to other systems and applications. Learn more about Fibion at fibion.com/research. Fibion, from researchers to researchers.
And then are you tracking the outcome with the same Fitbit, that whether it was a positive or negative strategy? Yeah.
There's two things that I'm measuring. The first thing is the physical response. So whether the sedentary behavior decreased via the Fitbit. The second thing is the perceived receptiveness of the coach. So did the participant feel that coach was a good coach? And because what I think is very important is in the very beginning, right? People have... There's a learning model for people. There's the reactive behavior, and then there's the habitual behavior. And so one of the things that we want to do is to improve the perception of the coach in order to improve the habits.
Yeah, makes sense. So do you think there's a mismatch, that some things work, that people actually do it but don't like the coaching, or how does it go?
So I think you may get these like scenarios where it's like, if I'll be, it's telling me to do this work, but I don't really think it's a good time, but okay, I'll do it. Like there's a little bit of hesitancy.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, that's interesting. So one of the papers is this tailored coaching and how well it works. Do you have some other publications already published or on the line?
Right. So there's one publication over in the Connected Health Application Systems and Engineering Conference.
Yeah, I'm still trying to understand it. Yeah.
That was a really that was one of the local conferences. They're trying to improve the gap between the researchers and the behavioral health and the computer science. Because one of the things that we found is that if you look at the knowledge and you imagine that they're like towers, you have the behavioral health tower, which is right here, and then you have the computer science tower, which is over here. But there's this huge gap in between, so it's trying to link the two worlds together.
All right. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. Very interesting. Yeah, go on.
So I have another paper from ICAM-PAM, I think. Yeah. And that's not for the coaching component. That's more of analyzing the agreement. So in the previous study, what we did was we looked at the Fitbit versus actigraph, the wrist-worn Fitbit and the wrist-worn actigraph. And and the polar heart rate and the heart rate coming from the Fitbit. And we were measuring the agreement between the two, the devices.
So how did it look? So did you measure the polar heart rate also from the wrist or from the chest?
Both. It's from the polar heart rate was from the chest.
All right, and yeah.
The Fitbit was on the wrist.
Yeah, and how did it look?
So one of the interesting things was that Fitbit, the main key concept is that the Fitbit underestimates the levels of the heart rate levels. It underestimates the heart rate levels. And the other thing is that there's more disagreement in the first 5 minutes of activity and the last 5 minutes of the activity. So we measured essentially the study was to look at, different exercises. So we looked at people running, walking, biking, lifting weights, a whole variety of suites. And we found that there was a large disagreement in the beginning. And what we think is the issue is that the way that Fitbit measures the heart rate, so it uses like photoplethysmography. It's a very, very big word. Essentially, there's a green light and it's emitting into your wrist. And it's measuring the amount of blood flow that's coming through. And we think that it takes some time in order for the blood to start getting up this rate, in order for it to, be more accurate.
So is it actually measuring the amount of blood, or does it try to see from the kind of the pulse that when did the heart beat? I don't know fully how it works. Do you?
I thought it was, so it emits a light and it detects how much the light is coming back. And if there's more blood, then it would emit less light, I think. I think. Don't quote me.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, it makes sense. And did you did you take into account like different skin colors? Because I think it might work differently depending on the skin color.
We did not. That's actually very good. That's a very good point.
Yeah, and I'm living now in Finland, and it is very cold here in the winter, and I think there's the veins actually constrict when it's colder to preserve your heat. So what I have noticed sometimes when I test the wrist-worn heart rate monitors, that maybe they underestimate more when it's a cold weather. I'm not sure. I haven't tested it like systematically, but I think there might be. So it might be some skin color things, temperature things that affect it. But yeah, anyway, I think it gives an idea of the heart rate at least.
Right. Yeah, I think so. One of the things that I'm really wanting to consider about is that from a researcher's perspective, it's very good for us to have an accurate measure of heart rate. You can imagine that there's scenarios like, so one of the studies that we're actively looking on right now is the pre-hypertension in adults. And you can imagine that if you prescribe saying, get into your target heart rate of X amount, and people with pre-hypertension, the device is telling them this amount, but their heart rate is actually this amount, that can actually increase the risk of any type of, heart attack. And so one of the things that I'm considering right now is that, one, could we adjust? And that's always, adjust the heart rate that's Fitbit's telling the individual based on the activity detection of what we're doing. The other thing is that I understand that we want to be able to prescribe particular health, outcomes using this heart rate and target zone. But unless a professional were to tell the person to get into that rate, would the general population understand what it means to be in this particular zone? So one of the things that we were debating back was we were trying to measure the minutes spent in sedentary, light, moderate, and vigorous. And we wanted to one of the questions that we wanted to ask was, participants, how many minutes of moderate to vigorous activity do you have? And then we thought about it, and we were thinking okay, our participants probably wouldn't understand that. So types of messages can we give in order for it to be meaningful to the layperson? And so if the heart rate is off just a little bit, does that affect what the layperson can understand? Or maybe we can say, okay, let's not look at heart rate, but maybe look at this other measure that summarizes the general, what they're doing.
All right. Yeah. Yeah. And your algorithm, was it looking like the steps and the heart rate, or what variables that Fitbit is giving it was kind of looking and considering? Right.
So we were considering all of the variables. So we were considering steps, heart rate, the intensity estimates that the Fitbit was giving. When we evaluated, we used the intensity level and the steps. We also, but one of the things when we looked at heart rate, what we did was we normalized. So we looked at heart rate reserve instead. We didn't look at pure heart rate. So we looked at what percentage that they were with respect to their maximum and resting heart rates.
All right. And yeah, probably you can see that if they are about there in the moderate vigorous intensity activity, you will see that some things are on the baseline and then some things are somewhat there. Yeah. And no, that's very interesting. And you had Fitbit and Actigraph and Polar, and you compared the Actigraph to Fitbit, or how was the comparison in that one?
So that's a separate study, but so when we compared the step count and the heart rate from the Polar and the Fitbit, right? So the Polar heart rate and the Fitbit heart rate and the Actigraph accelerometer and the Fitbit accelerometer. And so we use the default algorithms that were provided in the Actigraph to get the step counts on the minute level. And then we summarized in different levels, say, for example, the hour, right? We looked at the hour level. That's a different study.
All right. Yeah.
Looked at specific bouts of activity, and on those specific bouts, we looked at the totals. Then we looked at the totals in each of the different bins, like the intensity level of bins. So whether it was sedentary, light, moderate, or vigorous.
All right. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. And how is it, like, a little bit off topic from the previous discussion, but did your participant feel sometimes that you kind of know too much of their information, like surveillance, or how do they respond?
Right. So, well, for the Fitbit and Actigraph study, that was a total invasion of privacy, and I think everyone knew that. Because everyone who left their lab felt like, so this was free living condition. Everyone who left their lab made a comment about they felt like a robot or something like that, because they were strapped up here. They had two devices. Sometimes they had a watch on their other hand. Oh, they had a watch on their dominant hand, and then they wore two different, they wore Fitbit and then the Actigraph.
Yeah. And how do you think this will go when you try to commercialize this? It is quite a lot of private information, and there's a stricter regulations now in Europe, and I guess also in US. So how do you see to get over these obstacles? Or
so the perception is definitely split. Some people are like, I don't want anyone to know anything about me. I'm not going to get a Fitbit because I don't want them to monitor my activity. I don't want them, they say, I keep my phone in airplane mode. And then there's the others that are like, whatever, if it helps me, it helps me. And then there's people like, oh yeah, great. So I'm noticing it's like a 40-60% split about the people that want the want the monitoring and the people that don't want the monitoring. So 40 meaning the people that don't want the monitoring. And it's ironic because I just had a friend who, he was the person that is like, oh, I'm going to have everything in airplane mode. And now he's wearing Fitbits and collecting all his data. He's like, I'm giving up. It's all everywhere anyways. Right.
Yeah, no, I think that's really interesting. Like, humankind have never been in this situation before. So maybe in 20 years, we're thinking like, whoa, how stupid people were. They were giving all this data. Or it is like, whoa, they were afraid that you cannot give this data. It's there anyway. And like, what can you do with somebody's, like, if you know that I went to lunch for that place, so what? It's like, so we don't know how it will go.
Right. I think for the time being, generally my conversations with people that are afraid or something, I show them, like, I have them open up their phone, and then I say to them, open up because on iPhones, everyone has a health app. And in your health app, it already tells you how many steps you've traveled that day. What's the distance you've traveled? Things like that. And it's like, it already has your information. It's okay. Just give it to me.
Yeah, that's true. And then about AI and machine learning, I think this could have been in the beginning of the podcast, but what is the difference between AI and machine learning, and what is the subcategory of which?
So AI is the whole entire field of artificial intelligence. Machine learning is a subfield of the AI. And essentially, machine learning is only involved with the analysis of patterns inside of the data. So it's trying to find trends and patterns given a data set. But for AI, you have lots of different other things. You have things that are like, can you structure the data in a particular way in order for you to communicate? Can you formalize some languages? It's a lot about the structure of things. It includes things like searching, not necessarily for, finding patterns in the data. You can imagine that if you put a robot just in your house, for example, and it was trying to figure out where's the dust, right? It's running a search algorithm. So that falls under the broader spectrum of AI.
All right. So the machine learning is looking for patterns. So basically, your algorithm is machine learning, but when it gives actually those messages and responds to those, does it go more to AI, or how would you say?
Right. So when I look at the people's data and I try to find, okay, what type of person what type of behavior profile does this person fit? That's more of the machine learning side. And then when I start looking at, okay, can I build this, structure that maps between different behavior profiles and finds, that like relates the differences between them. That more is the AI side of things.
Yeah. And when you talk about your startup, do you need to mention AI to be in a better position with the investors rather than machine learning?
Right. I think so. I want to focus more on the AI side of things. But I do all the data analytics, all that good stuff. I'll give you a funny story. So my son at the time was 4 months old, and I was trying to figure out what is the what's the startup name. And he comes up to me. Well, he doesn't walk at this time. So he's sitting right next to me, and like he hears me, and I'm like, Alan, what should the company name be? Like I've gone through all these different possibilities. I've created like a list of like 100 names, and he goes, woo. So okay, done deal. Have to listen to the kid.
All right, that's a good story for a name. And I think the most important question of this podcast is that you are developing artificial intelligence. So when is your algorithm going to take over the world and slave all the humankind?
I mean, we have that in perspective for 2024, you know?
Right, so soon. So everyone, the end is coming.
The advancement of AI follows this exponential pattern. So we have this one that analyzes behavior. So next time, you know, we're going to look at the credit card patterns. You know, next year we're going to look at, you know, who are all your friends and what their patterns are.
Yeah, all right. Sounds good. I think there's nothing to ask anymore. I think
You don't want to tell me because I'm going to enslave the world.
Yeah, I know. No, I think it's been really interesting discussions, and I think there will be probably a lot of people interested in collaboration. I would also guess that many companies are interested of your algorithms as it really brings kind of a new depth for the activity trackers. And I think quite many people who use Fitbits and others, they have kind of get bored of it. You know, first you thrill that it measures steps, and then after 3 weeks, it's still measuring steps and it doesn't give you too much. But if it's actually start to guide you in a personalized way, and it actually improves that after using it 2 months, it's actually a better Fitbit than what it was. I think it's brilliant. So thanks a lot for being a guest, and I hope you can visit our podcast also another time.
Thank you, Ali. Thank you for having me. It was a really excellent conversation.
This podcast is sponsored by Fibion. Get scientific validation and learn more about Fibion at fibion.com/research. The Physical Activity Researcher podcast has created an activity tracker purchase guide for researchers. Get your free copy from the link in the podcast description.
Thank you for listening to the Physical Activity Researcher podcast.